So welcome everyone. Today's show is called Porn Addiction Pandemic, and I am joined here with Joshua Shea. Joshua is an author. He's a public speaker. He has 3 books. They're on Amazon. They're also on his website. All of them are around pornography, addiction, and you can learn more at his website, which is P, like pornography, paddictrecovery.com. P as in porn, addictrecovery.com. And we'll link up in the show notes as well to make it easier. Joshua, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
So I've heard you say that 1 in 3 men have a problem with pornography. I'm sure that's true, but what does that look like? Like, how do you know if it's a how do you define like a problem or an addiction? How do you draw the line?
Well, this specific survey that I refer to a lot was done by the Barna Group in 2017. So it's now 4 or 5 years old pre-pandemic. So it's probably low anyway. This was people who self-diagnosed in this study. So the question is, what is one person's problem versus another person's not problem? Well, that's in the eyes of the beholder, I suppose. But to have 1 out of 3 men who are between 18 and 30 years old say, I'm not sure my relationship with pornography is okay or healthy, because what this survey said was that you either believe you watch too much pornography, you believe you're developing a problem with pornography, or you have full-blown addiction. So that means that 1 out of 3 men know that they have a negative relationship with pornography. That's really the big thing. One of the things I try to stress to people is I'm not necessarily anti-pornography. I'm not out there trying to ban pornography because it would be more effective to bang my head against a rock. It's been around since the dawn of man, and it's not going anywhere. We go into amazing museums and look at the pornography on the walls of what the pornography was of the 1600s, because all they had was painting then. But the thing is that most people, take this as an anti-pornography message. It's not. It's a pro-healthy sexuality message. Some people can use porn, some people can't. I generally don't get into the morals of it. I generally don't get into the pratfalls of the trafficking and other, what's going on with the performers. I know that there are all these problems, but there are problems in everything. You're going to tell me that in the big box restaurant industry, there aren't a lot of people who use drugs and are unhappy. Walk into any TGI Fridays kitchen and tell me otherwise.
It's a great point.
So really, it's a matter of, I want people, if they are going to use pornography, to know what they're getting into. Much like cigarettes, much like alcohol, anything that has potential harm, we just don't talk about this potential harm in our society. Had we talked about it, might I have not become a porn addict? Perhaps. Might I have avoided some of this stuff? Perhaps. So I'm out there sharing my story, and I'm out there sharing the research that I've either found or that I've created myself, and just trying to tell people that, hey, if you're going to use this, it's not just all fun and games. There is a potential backlash. You should know about it. You should use it in an educated way. And if you think that you have problems, either get help or stop using it.
Yeah. I had an author, journalist, investigative journalist on the show probably a year ago, and we were chatting about the future of advanced sex toys, like sex robots and things like this. And I was proposing that maybe there's an upside, maybe there's a positive, and maybe they could be used in places like prisons or places where men don't have access to sex dolls. And her knee-jerk reaction was, well, men are in prison, they should probably be deprived of sex. And I had this moment where I went, whoa. Like, there are very big differences between men and women, which I don't pretend to understand. But that statement, what I realized there in that moment is she doesn't understand the biological impulse of a 15-year-old boy, or for that means a 43-year-old boy. The idea
how well did that work for the Catholic Church?
Correct. Well, this is why I come down to it. I was in India about 15 years ago, and I was in this monastery town where a bunch of monks in training live. These monks in training are teenage boys who wear orange robes, and it's all boys. And every single internet shop in this high mountainous village has little booths, which are they're essentially pornography booths, right? And I was there and I'm looking at all these internet shops. I don't want to even check my email because it's disgusting, you know? Yeah. And I realized like, these are people trying their hardest not to do this. It's completely frowned upon. And these kinds of statements is when I realized like some people don't understand. They don't understand. And I don't know if it's because they're asexual or because they're of a different orientation or what it is. But if you're someone like me and someone I assume like you, there are certain impulses that it's beyond you. It is larger than you. This is millions of years of evolution. My body wants to procreate in a way that I can't even begin to express. Fortunately, I've been able to control that, and I've never been out of control in any ways. But at the same time, I'm not in any position to judge this or that behavior. All I can say is this is a fundamental planetary thing that's happening. This is not like boy meets girl romantic movie thing. This is my human organism wants to procreate, and that drive is as fundamental as I want to eat breakfast. I mean, it's just there.
Well, this is primordial stuff. This is primordial, basic cellular stuff.
Yeah.
And that's been happening. You know, people are like, well, why aren't you out there fighting to ban porn? And it's like, you know, if you go and look at the earliest cavemen, you can look at the walls of those caves and you will find crude pornography. Go into any great museum, go straight to the Egyptian and medieval exhibit. You are going to see some X-rated stuff on that pottery. You know, the Kama Sutra, which is basically the first sex guide, thousands of years old from India. You know, this stuff has been around forever. And we have to face that sexuality is a major part of our being, whether we want to admit it or not, because guess what? Whether you want to think about it or not, your mom and dad one night got it on, and that's why you're here. And I know none of us want to think about that, but that's why we're here. That's why our kids are here. And it's not just the, you know, penis into vagina thing. It's everything around sexuality as well. And that's what, you know, that's kind of what my message is out there, is that this is a lot more than just perverts, you know, in their mom's basement or perverts running through the park, you know, wearing a long trench coat. The fact is, over 60% of women who are under 50 years old look at porn once a month. Over 80% of men under 50 years old look at porn once a month. You know, the average normal person looks at porn at this point. And we still pretend that they don't. We still pretend that it's something for, you know, perverts and the outliers. And because we don't want to talk about those things in the back of our head where we have that little scratch and we need to get it itched. And it just happens to involve, you know, 3 men, 2 women, and a big vat of Cool Whip. And I'm not talking about this in mixed company, so I'll just look at it on the internet later and pretend that I didn't.
Sure. I guess where I was going with the question is like, I have no idea where appropriate use comes from. Prohibition, as you mentioned, is impossible. You go back as far as you want, whether it's prostitution or pornography, it has always existed. It will always exist. You couldn't even pretend to ban this kind of stuff. And of course, what we're dealing with right now is the easy access proliferation, and appropriate use is just so hard to navigate. But again, it's really hard for me to say it's all bad. It's never good, because, you know, there are so many different cases, whether it's these monks trying to control their teenage urges in the mountains, or whether it's someone who's isolated and living in there are so many cases where not only does responsible use seem appropriate, it actually seems like the best way to channel that energy. I'm even curious if at some point there'll even be studies released where there's actually some positive correlations. And I mention that because there's been some studies around video gaming, and I'm not a gamer. I'm not a huge fan. I don't love it when my kids play games, but they do. But there's some pretty interesting data that shows that video gaming actually reduces violence because it keeps kids off the street, gives them an outlet for these kinds of things. Who knows? You know, stats go either way. But I'm just not sure. How do you think about like appropriate use? Like, how do you think about this? You know, I have a boy who just turned 10 and we haven't had a chat about pornography. I don't even know how to broach the topic. Like, how do you even begin to think about what's responsible use? Because that to a teenage brain, what's sitting there on those you porn, you channels, all that stuff is just crack cocaine. And it's not something you have to say no to or say yes to. It's the siren's call. It will call every, I can't imagine being that age in this time. And I don't know how to have that conversation. And like you said, everyone is accessing this stuff. It's something like, people say like Facebook's a big website, like Instagram's a big website. Like the big websites, the internet is basically 50% porn and then a whole bunch of gambling and then like a little bit of social media. And nobody wants to talk about that. And so how do you even begin to think about like how you could have a responsible, appropriate conversation with a teenage boy about what to do with this thing that's just there on their phone, on their computer, it's in their school library, it's everywhere.
Well, I think it's a multi-tiered approach. I think first it starts when they're very young, and I think it starts with number one, identifying body parts correctly, not putting cute little names on them, and not shaming or anything. You have a penis, you have a vagina, you have a this, you have a that. This is what it's used for. I think as a parent, you have to determine when the procreation. This is how babies are made. Talk comes, but this is not the same talk, and I think that a lot of people make that mistake. The birds and the bees talk is not the same as the be careful of pornography talk. Be careful of pornography talk, I think, is more like the be careful of cigarettes, be careful of drugs, be careful of drinking, this kind of stuff. When a child's young, I think that you can simply tell them when they're 6, 7, 8 years old, if you have your phone or if you are using a tablet and you see pictures of grown-ups without their clothes on, make sure you let me know because I want to see where that came from because that's stuff for adults' eyes. And that's usually a good enough reason for a 7-year-old kid to not do something. As they get a little older, around your son's age, he is in that age group. The average boy sees pornography for the first time now at 10 years old.
Sure.
And they are watching it regularly by 12, 13 years old, especially if nobody's ever talked to them about it. So what I would suggest, you can put filters on your phone. You can talk to your kid about it, but what's he going to do when his friend on the school bus or the schoolyard holds up the latest junk from Pornhub on their phone? That's the big question. And what I would simply do at 10 years old is tell him, well, you're going to see more and more of this. This is not, we know enough about this now that this is not healthy for you to look at a lot right now. When you're older, you can make your own decisions and you can decide if you want to smoke when you're older. I hope you don't. I don't want you to, but that's your right. That's your legal right. However, now that you live in my house under my rules, I would prefer that you not look at this stuff because we know that, especially for young boys, it's not good for them. In another year or two, I think it's appropriate to start talking actually about some of the effects of pornography. Because come 2 years from now, he's going to have friends who are looking every day, quite often, probably talking about it. And that's when, and this is basically, you've stumbled into what I think is the solution to deal with pornography use among teenagers or teenage boys specifically, is that we need to start talking about porn-induced erectile dysfunction when these boys are 12, 13 years old.
Sure. To scare them off.
Well, it's not to scare them off because it's true. And I've had some, I'm a coach and I've dealt with a couple of guys who have had this. And the most extreme case was a guy who, he was 22 at the time. His girlfriend was 20. They needed to have pornography playing in the room if they were going to have sex and finish. The only way he could finish was with pornography playing. He had trained his brain and the pleasure centers, and we know that's the dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, all that stuff. That's what he trained to need pornography to finish. So his girlfriend figured out, if I sit in the living room and I'm on my laptop, if you sit in the bedroom, you're on your phone. To him, it was a screen. So it was pornography. He had to trick his brain into getting to the point that he could believe what he was looking at was pornography, even though it was his girlfriend. When he came close to finishing, he would get in the room. She would come running in the room and they would finish like a quote unquote normal couple. And They came to me when she said, the day I realized that if we were going to have a baby, we'd have to have porn playing in the room when it was conceived, was the
Mm,
day I realized we needed to start doing some work on this stuff. And
yeah.
if you think about that, I mean, that's pretty extreme. And I don't think a lot of 13, 14-year-old boys think about that.
Yeah.
13, 14-year-old boys, they want a girlfriend. They want to sooner than later have sex, but they'll take what
Yeah.
they can take for now. And the
Sure.
problem is, if they're the kind of kid who isn't going to have sex till college, that's 5, 6 years
Yeah.
of just watching porn
Mm,
and potentially harming you. So I think if we tell 13-year-old boys, listen, we have thousands of cases of guys who started out just like you,
yeah.
and in 5, 6 years, they can't be with a woman because essentially their penis is broken.
Yeah.
If that doesn't scare the hell out of a 13-year-old boy, I don't know what will. But I
Yeah.
think that's the kind of stuff that I think a 12, 13-year-old can handle. You can
Yeah.
determine if your 10-year-old does, you know him. But
Hmm.
I think that this is something that, like so much in life, comes in stages. And yeah,
Yeah.
it sucks. It sucks as parents in 2021. We have to tell our boys and our girls about pornography. But you know what? We don't have to deal with air raid drills anymore. And we're not going out,
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
not going out on
We're
the
getting
river and
drafted. Yeah.
right, we're not going out on the river and cutting ice out because that's the only way for us to get ice.
Yeah.
The world changes. This is where we find ourselves. If our generation of parents and the next generation, if we can take this somewhat seriously, we
Mm,
can see some big drops in the numbers. The internet's going nowhere, sexuality is going nowhere,
no.
pornography is going nowhere. So what do we do to fix just this little amount? I think it's with the kids. I think it's with the next generation. They have to look at this like a legal drug, like
Legal drug.
cigarettes or like
Sure.
alcohol. And
Sure.
that's really it. You don't have to talk about, aside from the phrase naked people, you don't have to get into pornography and what the content is with them
Yeah.
at all.
From an addiction perspective, if I understand correctly, you have struggled with alcohol as well. Do you really
Yeah.
separate it at all, or is addiction addiction? Is it different for different people? Is the impulse the same? Is it a desire to escape, or how do you contextualize the two?
Well, I can tell you that the first time I used pornography when I was 12, I was
Mm,
hooked immediately. Hooked
yep.
immediately. It gave me a warm feeling. 2 years later, when I got drunk for the first time, I was hooked immediately.
Yeah.
I have never had that feeling with another substance or behavior. And I've
Mm,
played plenty of video games. I've gambled plenty. I've
yeah.
tried a few drugs I shouldn't have.
Sure.
None of them did what alcohol or porn could do for me.
Mm,
And I can tell you, people need to recognize that something like pornography addiction, it doesn't take place between your legs. It takes place
yeah.
between your ears.
Yeah.
That's where all addiction takes place. Food addiction
Mm,
doesn't take place in your stomach.
yeah.
Gambling addiction doesn't take place in your bank account. It's
Right.
all in your head.
Yeah.
95% of addiction is the same. Addiction is addiction is addiction is addiction. The different addictions have different side effects,
Yeah.
but they all are about calming a storm in your mind.
Mm,
Now, that storm can come from a lot of different places. It's almost always from unresolved trauma from when you were young, and
mm,
you develop this survival skill, you develop this coping mechanism.
mm,
I can tell you with both alcohol and pornography, and having talked to at this point probably thousands of addicts of various stripes, that it's just that little nagging voice in the back of your head that literally says you need this or you will die.
mm,
So when and if I told you, you need oxygen or you're going to die,
yeah.
you need to drink water or you're going to die, it is
Yeah.
on par with that. That is why addicts put things in front of their family, in front of
Mm,
their jobs, in front of everything that's important, because the brain is telling you you're going to die if you don't get this. You don't go play ball with your son this afternoon, whatever. As long as you can, get those 3 beers, or you can get that 20-minute session of looking at porn,
mm,
you'll be okay. If you don't, you're not going to be present playing pass. You're not going to want to be there. You're going to be, almost twitching and jonesing, needing that thing.
mm,
That's what addiction is. Addiction is like just having this, like you said, siren calling you all the time and convincing you that there's no other way to live. You absolutely need this. as soon as possible. It's almost too late that you don't have it, because you should have it at all times.
Yeah.
And it tells you there is no other way to be than this.
Yeah. So I know that you have kind of taken things to an extreme, and we haven't kind of gotten into your story, but now as an educator, as a, coaching people recovering, do you feel like you can never get out of the cycle because now you have to talk about it as your career? I'm just curious how the mental gymnastics of this.
It's actually good. I'll tell you, I collected baseball. I've always had a bit of an addictive personality.
Sure.
When I was like 14, 15 years old, I collected baseball cards. I ended up with over 100,000. This was that boom in the late 80s of baseball cards. And I got my first ever job when I was 15. It was still under the table at a baseball card shop at the local mall. And I loved it. I worked 10, 12 hours a day, loved being around. But after like 2-3 months, I recognized I wasn't collecting baseball cards on my own anymore. I never collected them again. I worked there about 2 years because that was my work. I didn't want to keep doing that. People ask,
people ask me,
Well, people ask me, have you read this book? Have you read this book? For 25 years, I was a journalist and I was an editor. The last thing I wanted to do when I got home was read more. So
interesting.
It's almost now where it's like, this is my work and I want to be done with it. And I don't have urges. When I wrote my last book, I had to get statistics off of Pornhub. And I hadn't been on a porno website in over 5 years at that point. And I thought about asking my wife, hey, can you look up, I need the numbers of videos in these categories. I thought about asking her, and then I was like, no, you know what? I'm a big boy. I can do this. And I sat and I went on to Pornhub and I typed in, massage. I typed in teen. I wanted to know what these different genres had for amount of videos. And of course, I saw the thumbnails and I got my numbers. And when I saw the thumbnails, it wasn't like, oh, all right. It was more like, my God, those people look sad and unhappy. And I don't want to say coerced, but like they'd rather be elsewhere. And
bored,
yeah, exactly. And the thing was, I got my numbers and I clicked off, and I didn't want to go back to it. Because the reason I used to use porn, that unresolved trauma has been resolved. And it's like saying, well, I had this giant wound in my arm. I kept putting a Band-Aid on it forever. But then finally I took the Band-Aid off and I dealt with the wound. I healed the wound. So now I don't need a Band-Aid because the wound is healed. Yeah, there's still a big scar. Yeah, nothing really changed. The, unresolved trauma simply becomes resolved trauma. You learn to live with it. You learn to move on. But when I don't need the Band-Aid, I don't go look for a Band-Aid. So when I don't need the porn, I don't go look for the porn. I click off of it. When I did that research, I click off of it. And aside from telling this story, I don't really think about that moment again. I don't know if you ever truly become recovered. I've been in some debates with people about that, but I don't have the triggers that I once did. So between not having the triggers and between podcast coaching, my writing, I'm dealing with this stuff, anywhere from 4 to 8 hours a day. And at the end of the day, I've talked about naked people doing crazy stuff for so long during the day. The last thing I have the urge to see is naked people doing crazy stuff at the end of the day.
One thing that I struggle with, it's like I had a business for about 5 years where almost all of our clients had food addiction, very, very serious food addiction. And it was just so hard because you couldn't quit food. You just can't quit food, you know? And so, it's easy for you and I to say that we could quit porn, but if somebody is, for whatever reason, unpartnered, doesn't have access to a partner, that we could always say there's always someone for everyone, but that's not always true. That's not always true. Their partner could be ill, their partner could be hospitalized, their partner could be dying, there's all kinds of reasons.
Let's admit, we've both met people who there's not going to be anybody for.
It's not going to happen. Yeah, it's not going to happen. And yet that person has the same biological imperative, survive and procreate every single morning. And again, it's one of these things. It's, how does that person even begin to think about this? Because is it an addiction? Is it just an appropriate manifestation of, like, this is where I really get torn, because there are a lot of people in that category for a number of reasons, right? A number of reasons.
Yep.
What percentage? I don't know, but it's not single digits. It's maybe 10, 20, 30% of people are non-sexual with other human beings. And it's like, what are they supposed to do with that? And so much of, when I see anger and trolling online and so many things, I can't speak for women, but for men, so often I just see sexual frustration manifest. And I don't know what that would do to me, but not good things, not good things, not good things. If you put me in a prison with a bunch of men for 10 years, I wouldn't want to get anywhere near me. And I don't mean that I would be dangerous, but I don't know what I would be, but I would not be pleasant. And there's a reason why we don't elect unpartnered politicians. And nobody wants to talk about it, but we don't trust single men. We don't trust them. They're not trustworthy. Anything's possible. And the longer they go in that position, the less trustable they are. In my industry, I work in the yoga industry. It's a tradition of these sort of celibate gurus. Of course, none of them are celibate. They're all philandering like crazy. And everybody's sort of enamored / scared of the guy in the orange robes, because clearly what he's saying and what he's doing are not the same thing. So, for people listening who say, yeah, great, both of you have partners, both of you have figured out a way to find healthy sexuality. What about the person who isn't working on it, but is not there? What are the alternatives, really?
Well, the thing is, if you are looking at porn, if you are masturbating, and you can determine how much you think is okay, if it's not having negative effects on your mental or physical or emotional health, if it's not having negative effects on your responsibilities in life, be them to family members or work, or even just yourself, if you're not having negative feedback, it doesn't actually fall into the definition of addiction.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that, when I coach, I do a lot of coaching of partners of porn addicts who are dealing with betrayal trauma. And a lot of times what I'll get a woman, almost exclusively, that's who the partner is.
Yeah.
I'll get a woman who is like, I need you to talk to my husband. I need you to talk about his addiction with him. And I'll sit and I'll talk with him. And after about 15 minutes, it's very clear to me, he doesn't have a porn addiction.
Yeah.
She hates porn.
Yeah.
He doesn't care.
Yeah.
And he keeps looking at porn.
Yeah.
Now, does that make him an addict? Well, based on everything they both told me, no. It makes him a crappy partner, but it doesn't make him an addict. And that's the thing. I almost to relax women who genuinely have porn addict partners, I tell them, listen, this guy's not looking at porn the way that a normal person does. I didn't look at porn because I like naked ladies or I wanted to get off. When I was at my worst, there was no masturbation with porn. It was just looking at porn. And at the very end of right before, I got help, I actually made the crossover into chat rooms because it escalates and I needed to talk to a real life person. And try to control them if I could, because that's really what my addiction was about. But ultimately, what people need to recognize is addictive behavior and recreational behavior are very different. So you have to determine which one yours is first. If you think you're using too much, then pull it back. If you can't stop using it, then you're starting to look at a problem. And then it's time to, I always urge people, the first time you think you have a problem, talk to somebody who had that problem and who got better, because they can tell you what happens from here. They can talk to you and say, oh boy, you are in the thick of it. Or they can talk to you and say, you don't have an addiction, but you need to pay attention. They can, and they can talk to you without judgment. They can talk to you without embarrassment. They can talk to you without shame. And then if you need to create a strategy, you talk to a coach, you talk to a therapist, you talk to somebody who knows what they're doing in this area. If you're an addict, but ultimately, we cannot be celibate. It's not a matter of turning it off, because there's such a thing as sexual anorexia, and that's just as unhealthy. And you mentioned people with eating issues. And what's interesting is I went to 2 rehabs, first one for alcohol, second one for sex porn. They also, at the second one I went to, they also had an eating disorder program. And it was shocking because I never would have got this, but how many times they put the eating disorder program and the sex porn disorder programs together
Hmm.
for our learning because alcohol, I haven't had a drink in 7.5 years.
Yeah.
My whole thing is 100% abstinence.
Yeah.
But when it comes to pornography, you're also, well, what is pornography? Is just, can I go to a
Yeah.
strip club? Is that okay? Can I watch a movie on TV? Is that okay? If it's,
Yeah.
a regular R-rated movie that might have some nudity in it, is that okay? Can I go to the beach? Is that okay? There's so many different levels here, much
Yeah.
like there is with food. There is so many,
Right.
it's not just a matter of stop. It's a matter of you have to create a healthy relationship
Yeah.
in your mind with this substance. And that's what the big kicker is. Like you said, with food, with pornography, it can be challenging, but it's also one of these things. How many people may eat a little too much, but don't really have a mental issue with food? How
Yeah.
many people eat maybe a little too little? Yeah, I guess that's what to say. But doesn't rise to the point of being a problem.
Yeah.
It's a spectrum,
Yeah.
and you've got to kind of figure out where you are on it. And then if you're too far one side or the other, then it's time to get some help.
Yeah. I hear a lot of, for whatever reason, because of the podcast and because of another reason, for whatever reason, I get a lot of inbound, and sort of people who don't know you that well, they often tell you stuff that they wouldn't tell somebody that they even knew sort of well. And so, somebody will send me a random Instagram message, and people will tell me, very often women will tell me that they're very concerned about their husband cheating on them with porn. And my initial reaction is always just like, whoa, cheating and porn. And we're like, just stop for a second, because what are we really talking about? And of course, everyone has a right to draw their own boundaries and what's okay for them and what's not okay for them. And we all have a right to define our own relationships. But from my very limited experience with inbound from couples, well, I shouldn't say couples, from women, is that many people many of the people who have approached me with this, and people I've had on the podcast too, what they're really identifying is protect the relationship behavior that they see as threatening. And what I mean by that is pick your fetish, pick your orientation, pick whatever it is. Let's just pick something really obvious. Maybe a bisexual man who's in a relationship with a woman, and he wants to be faithful, and he's figured out a way to make that work. I'm using a very, very, very obvious choice. There's other things that are a lot more complicated and nuanced and perhaps a little more esoteric.
Dangerous.
Dangerous, maybe even illegal. And what this person has found is a way to manage, again, this unexplainable, uncontrollable thing, and they're being vilified, maybe divorced for it. This is where it's even more nuanced than food. It's just, I guess with the food thing, at least it's a little bit easier to be binary. Like, this is causing health problems, this is not causing health problems.
There's some math in it.
Yeah. With sexuality, there are people who woke up today, Monday, and all they can think about is getting tied up. That's all they can think about. And it's overwhelming. And it's all they can think about. They have no idea why. They don't want to think about it. It's against their religion. It's against their marriage. It's all they can think about all day long. They want it to go away. It can't go away. And it has to be fulfilled. It just has to be. And this could happen to men. It could happen to women. For whatever reason, it seems to happen to men a lot more. But like, these are the kind of, this is where, for me, sexuality just seems impossible. It just seems so impossible to unwind. And again, I kind of come back to this thing. How do you start to navigate appropriate use? The couple you mentioned, is that bad what they're doing? One person on the couch, the other in the bed, or is that just okay? Is that a coping mechanism? How do you help people think about, without, like you said, not having morals, not having any stake in the ground, just understanding this is happening. It's human behavior. The fact that nobody's talking about the fact that most of the internet is pornography doesn't mean it's not there. How do people start to navigate the crazy nuance of this?
Well, I think that what you have to do is, first understand the science of it. You can apply morals. You can apply everything later.
Mm.
One of the things that I had going for me when I was an addict in early recovery is that my wife worked in healthcare. So
Mm.
she understood addiction at that point even better than I did. So
Interesting.
she understood what was going on in my mind, and that's
Mm.
why even though the porn was worse, even though the porn led to more problems in my life, and
Yeah.
it was longer, I went to alcohol rehab first,
Mm.
because I had to take care of that stuff. That was a
Yeah.
very triggery type thing.
Yeah.
I drank a lot. I drank far more than I ever looked at porn. I statistically should have driven into a house much longer before I ever looked
Sure.
at anything else. But I think that uh, people need to take a step back, understand that we are all very different.
Mm.
I don't know why somebody or how somebody exactly becomes a gambling addict.
Yeah.
There's a casino, just down the road from me. My wife and I go there probably 2-3 times a year. They have a great steakhouse, which we don't have a lot of here in Maine.
Mm.
So we enjoy dinner, and then we go play slot machines. And I have a rule for myself that I've had now for probably about 6-7 years. I can lose up to $40 or I can win up to 100, and then I leave. And this may take 5 minutes or this may
Yeah.
take an hour. At the end
Sure.
of an hour, no matter where I am, I leave. And I walk out and I don't think about it and I don't obsess about it. Now,
Yeah.
I know there are people standing at tables there who are risking their kids' college fund, that
Sure.
this big wheel, a little tiny, a ball, will end up falling into a red slot.
Yeah.
That's how they're basing the entire, their kids' future on this.
Mm.
And I don't understand that. That seems, dangerous and crazy and out
Yeah.
of control for me. But then, I was up for 3 hours, in the middle of the night when I should be sleeping, looking at pornography because it's the only thing that could calm me down in
Mm.
that last year or two of being an addict.
Yeah.
And I started to even look in the morning before I went to work, and I never did that before. And it escalates. And what we need to do is appreciate that everybody is different, and that again, remove the morality of it. There
Mm.
is not, we attached morality to the opioid crisis for so long. It's not like heroin showed
Yeah.
up 15 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not like Vicodin showed up 10 years ago. The reality, you can go back, and I was actually watching an episode of Dragnet from like 1959, and they were
Yeah.
talking about heroin pushers.
Sure. Sure.
You can go back and you listen to some of the earliest hip hop, pre Eminem, mid
Yep.
80s, late 80s. They're talking about Vicodin and other drugs.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
saw this coming. We saw this coming.
Yeah.
We knew this was going to happen, but
Mm.
we somehow labeled opiate and opioid users as being dirty, gross people who we didn't have to deal with. They
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
from the bad part of town, the other side of the tracks. They had nothing going for them. We don't need to spend resources and time trying to help these people. They will
Mm.
just end up killing themselves. So what? Let's move on as society. Okay, well, here we are 35 years later, and there's very few of us who don't have some direct connection to somebody who has an opioid or opiate problem.
Very
That
true.
could have
Yeah.
been dealt with 30 years ago, but we chose not to. And also, we take a look at this. Now, take a look at like the coronavirus. You can see what happens when we put our money and our scientific energy behind something. We
Sure.
shouldn't have we shouldn't have got so many different vaccines so fast. But this is what happens when people care. What we need to have people do, there is no vaccine for obviously porn addiction or any addiction yet,
Yeah.
but what we can do is spread the knowledge. What we can do is take what limited resources we have and share with people and have them understand that, yes, you may be you may be able to go and gamble just fine, like
Mm.
I can, but I do get that people become gambling addicts,
Yeah.
and people need to understand that people become porn addicts. And because you don't understand why I needed to spend 3-4 hours, at night looking at this stuff, is why you don't understand why that guy cares so much about roulette, because it's an illness. Ultimately, it's a mental illness.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you don't have it, you don't get it. And if you want to understand it tomorrow, take your cell phone, turn up all of the volumes on everything, every beep, every notification.
Yeah.
Turn up the volume on everything. Take a post-it note. Just put it right across the front of your phone and then put it down next to you. And within 5 or 10 minutes, if you're a normal person in today's society, something's going to ding. And you want to look at it, but you can't. And then a few more minutes later, something else. You hear a buzz. What's that? Did somebody just like a picture? Did somebody text me? What was that? I've had people try this. They last usually about 2 hours or 6 notifications.
Wow.
And then they have to grab their phone and rip it off. And I'm like, well, why did you have to look at it? I needed to know if somebody needed me. What happens if somebody died? Well, I can tell you 25 years ago, before smartphones and even before cell phones, people died all the time. And you just got the phone call an hour later. They were still dead. And it was okay.
They were still dead. Yeah.
And the fact that somebody gives you a thumbs up to the chicken cacciatore that you made last night is not something you need to look at immediately.
Yeah.
But we have a society of people worldwide who are addicted to their phones. Is it addicted like sex or cocaine or gambling? Or no, it's not like that when you're talking about the type of chemicals that are released. But when you can't put up with it anymore and you have to tear that post-it note off to see what people are saying to you, that's addiction. Now multiply that times 50 or 100 and you have your real hardcore drug and behavioral addictions. That's what it's like. And we need people to understand that, because you like video games and you're addicted, that doesn't mean that you are some kind of Comic-Con geek. Because you are addicted to porn, that doesn't mean you're some kind of pervert. Because you're addicted to food, that doesn't mean you're some kind of glutton. That's what we need people to understand. I think that's what stops people from getting help, is they feel like they're going to be judged the way they've always felt judged. And one of the most freeing moments I see with men is when I'm talking to them our first appointment, when it dawns on them, I don't care what they looked at. I probably saw it too. I probably saw worse.
Sure.
I don't care what you looked at. I don't care who was doing what. Let's talk about the bigger problem. And when they see that I don't care and I'm not going to judge them, it's like a weight comes off their shoulders and they can't wait to do more work and want to do more work because they found somebody who understands. And that's not out there right now, is people who understand this. And how are we ever going to talk about pornography addiction if we can't talk about pornography like adults? And you and I have been having this conversation for about 40 minutes now. And we've not talked about explicit pornography once because we don't need to.
Yeah. I think it's such an important topic. And I think so much of the stigma, like you said, is just that people don't talk about it. They're uncomfortable talking about it, but it doesn't mean that it's not everywhere. And I think it's double important for sexuality because so much of sexuality is unspoken, both the positive and the negative. I always say that sexuality, even at its best, is 98% fantasy. The actual reality is two awkward people bumping around in the dark for 11 minutes or something. But there's this whole drama that we gin up in our head. And when things go right, that's the positive part. When things go wrong, fast forward 4 years and 4 hours a night staring at a screen. But there's so much fantasy involved in all sexuality that when it's delinquent, when it's not acceptable, when it's pornography, and when it starts to become destructive, it's just the last thing anyone wants to do is stick themselves on a mic like you're doing and talk about it. So I appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah, it's I thought I would write my first book, or which was going to be my only book, just kind of putting it out there. I'm a journalist by trade, and I thought that's what I'd do. And it wasn't until after that book came out and I got all the feedback from the partners and the wives about, oh my God, what do I do? And that's when I realized there's more here. And, I will absolutely own my story if it's going to help other people. When I hit that great beyond, whatever that means, I hope that, my first few moments of the afterlife, there's a big scoreboard. And on one side, it has how many people I hurt. And on one side, it has how many people I helped.
Mm.
And if, when my time comes, if the number of people I helped is just one more than the people I hurt, then it was a net good.
Mm.
But I know how many people I did hurt because of my addictions, and I
Yeah.
know how many myself at the top of the list. But I hurt so many people. I was not the father I should have been 10 years ago. I was not the husband I should have been 10 years ago.
Sure.
I screwed over a lot of my employees when my company ended up folding, largely due to my addictions. So it's one of these things where I'm putting my own story out there. Is it embarrassing? Yeah, a little bit. Is it shameful? Yeah, a little bit. But I've kind of worked through that. And I think that the more people who can, the better off we are. If you would have told me that 3 years after starting to talk about this, I'd still largely be one of the only experienced voices talking about this, I wouldn't have believed it. I thought there would have been a lot more people. And while, it's great to be a class of one, I get all the interviews, I get all the speaking engagements, I get all the book deals, but I would love for there to be 100 guys or 100 girls out there, especially women, because we need some women to talk about their porn addiction, because it's the fastest growing segment of the addiction community is women. And we need more people to talk about their addiction. It doesn't make you a pervert. It doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't make you evil. It means that something happened in your life that caused you to go down this road and make you sick. And and that's the same thing with drinking. That's the same thing with smoking. It's the same thing with these behaviors that, despite the fact we understand are bad for us, they make us feel better, and we go to them again and again because we don't know any other way to feel better. So if hurting ourselves is the trade-off for feeling better, well, an addict is going to pick that 100 out of 100 times.
Yeah. Joshua, thanks so much for coming on the show. For people listening who want to find you online and find your books, tell them where to go.
Yeah, absolutely. You can learn about my books. You can read articles that I write every week. If you're looking for some resources on rehabs, therapy, 12 steps, I have that on my website. I also have all my options for coaching. I coach both porn addicts and I coach their partners who are dealing with trauma. You can visit and learn all about that stuff at the letter P, addictrecovery.com. That's paddictrecovery.com.
Thanks so much for your time. Let's keep in touch.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it. Had a good time.